What's up, YouTube? This is my review of the Condor Bushlore knife. First of all, I want to say that I'm not paid by Condor and they don't influence my opinion of their products in any way, shape, or form. Let's get started. First of all, the sheath. The sheath is excellent, as is the case with all Condor sheaths. For the stuff that they do send the sheath with, I know for some of their bigger machetes you have to buy the sheath separately, but most of their knives do come with a leather sheath. I'm not a huge fan of leather since it does retain moisture and takes forever and a day to dry out. However, for the price that I paid for this knife, that is a good quality sheath that didn't cost anything extra. I believe the price for this knife was $26. I got it on eBay. So 26 bucks, you get a leather sheath that is thick, about the same thickness as a leather holster for a gun. That's a good quality sheath. The specs on the knife is 3/16 of an inch thick. It's about as thick as the average K-bar knife that most people would know, and same thickness as the Condor Hudson Bay knife that I reviewed before. The overall length on it is 9 3/8 inches, and it has a blade that is 4 3/8 inch. It is made out of 1075 high carbon steel, and it is hardened to a Rockwell scale of 60, which is why some people had trouble redoing the grind on this knife, but I'll get into that a little bit later. It did come with a Scandi grind, which you don't see on this knife here because I already modified this knife. This isn't new out of the box. I've had this one for a little while. I've used it and I've modified it. So I will put a picture into this video of what a stock Bushlore knife looks like. But it came with a Scandi grind, and for something that is this thick, the Scandi grind just was not working, and especially not the one that Condor put on there. It was very shallow and the angle was just extreme. It looked like a splitting wedge. Bottom line is, the grind sucks. The way that this knife comes from the factory, it sucks. It might as well just be a chisel. I'll get into that in just a second. The grips on this are walnut, I believe. Not 100% sure on that, but I believe them to be walnut. Now, my first impressions are, when you pick this knife up, it's actually a lot heavier than it looks. It doesn't look like a large knife, and it doesn't look like it would be too heavy, but it actually feels pretty heavy in the hand. And I carry this knife on my neck, and you know, it's almost too heavy for that. I'm not going to say that it is, because I do it, but it's almost too heavy to carry on your neck. You can certainly do it, and I do it, but you're definitely not going to forget that it's there. It feels really good in the hand, though. I have to give it that the grips are pretty comfortable, and I like them. I wouldn't really change anything about the grips. The fact that the grips are, or the handle area is 5 inches long, actually gives you pretty good control, because the longer the handle on the knife, the better control you're going to have. Okay, now let's get to the grind part. The grind on this knife, as it comes, just sucks. And personally, I think that the way this knife comes from the factory, it would only be good for splitting wood. You're not going to sharpen any tent stakes with it very easily. I mean, you might as well be using a splitting maul to make your tent stakes and to notch them out. So the grind just sucks. And the other really serious problem with this is that the length of the original cutting area was only 3.5 inches long. Now, this is a 4 1/4 inch blade, but the actual usable cutting area only came to right here. They did try to put a finger choil in this area here for you to choke up on this and get better control, I guess, for, you know, finer tasks, but it just didn't work out for them. The original grind was only 3.5 inches long, and it stopped long before the blade hit the handle. But other than that, it's a great knife. Unfortunately, it's completely ruined by the shitty grind that Condor put on there. Now, the good news is, it is very easy to fix. What you need to do is convert the crappy Scandi grind that it came with to a convex grind. And this is easy to do. Some people have tried using sandpaper with no success, and that's because this knife is hardened to a Rockwell scale of 60, and that's pretty hard. You can use sandpaper to sharpen this, no problem, but you're not taking very much steel off when you do that. For you to actually cut off the entire shoulder off of the Scandi grind that this comes with, you're going to need something more than sandpaper. This steel is just too hard for you to be able to reshape a knife of this thickness with just sandpaper. The best way to do it is with a belt sander. I don't have a belt sander in my shop at home, so I used an angle grinder and a flap wheel. And if you don't know what a flap wheel is, it's basically a sanding disc that fits on an angle grinder. The one thing you'd have to watch out for if you use an angle grinder is you have to keep the knife cool. It is a high-speed tool and it will heat up your blade, so get you a cup of water, set it next to where you're working, and every 10 seconds or so dip the knife into the water. You don't want it getting hot. If it gets warm to the touch, then you need to dip it in the water and cool it off. That way you don't ruin your temper. Okay guys, this is an angle grinder and that's a flap wheel. It's just sandpaper in layers. And what you want to do is take your knife and lock it down with some clamps to your workbench like this. And once you did that, take your angle grinder and start making passes this way. And just keep going over and over, and then flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. When you feel this blade become a little too hot to the touch, just take the knife, dip it in some water, keep working. I decided to grind off the choil that was right here. I decided I didn't like that, so I just continued the grind all the way back to the handle and got rid of that flat area that they had right here. It's not hard if you have an angle grinder or a belt sander. You could probably even do it with a file. It would just take you a while. But after I did the mods, I think that this is a great knife. After I changed the grind, it cuts 1,000% better than it did before. I had trouble just making a tent steak with this knife the way it came. After I changed the grind to a convex grind, I have absolutely no trouble making anything out in the woods with that knife. Now the grips on this, they do have some unfinished tool marks right there. So I mean, not super duper high end or anything, but definitely workable. And for $26, I'm not going to complain at all. Just, you know, use some sandpaper and get it to where you like it. I would compare this in performance to $200-300 knives. Honestly, guys, this knife holds an edge really, really well after you change the grind. It probably holds an edge well with the old grind, but I wasn't going to find out. So the steel is very good. I haven't had to resharpen this except I think one time. It's not for carving though. It is too thick to be a carving knife. This is kind of the one knife that does everything. For splitting wood and building shelter, this knife will do. Now, just like a tool that does everything, kind of like a multi-tool, it does everything, but it doesn't do everything very well. It is a compromise. So for a knife this size, you're not going to split, you know, giant sequoias with this. You're kind of limited to, you know, to 2-3 inch logs. I mean, it will split that much, and it will do that very well. It's not going to compare to a large fixed blade or an axe or a tomahawk or anything like that. Now, I carry bigger blades most of the time anyway, so I actually prefer a thinner knife than this for camp chores, like this here Mora clipper that I'm sure everyone knows about. Now, this is a great knife for the money, but it's not full tang and it is kind of on the thin side. You're not going to baton this through wood constantly. Eventually it will break. If I'm not splitting wood or building shelter, I prefer a smaller knife, and since I have a larger fixed blade, or most of the time I carry a cold steel Trailhawk, this knife, it kind of doesn't serve any purpose for my loadout. What I actually prefer over a Mora clipper that I just showed you is the Condor Sapien knife, and that's this right here. This is actually a perfect knife for bushcraft, in my opinion, and I'll have a review coming up on this a little bit later. But it is thinner than the Bushlore, and it has a very nice skindy grind on it with a very comfortable handle. So that's my preference for a bushcraft knife. The Bushlore will make an excellent knife if you are looking for a light loadout. Basically, if you want one knife that can do everything, you know, you can, if you in a pinch, you could fillet a fish with this. It's not going to be pretty, but it will skin game, it will build shelter, and it will split wood. I do recommend the Bushlore if you like to tinker. If you don't mind changing the grind on a knife, if you find that fun, then by all means I highly recommend this knife. It is a great value for $26. Just a little bit of work with an angle grinder or a belt sander, and you can have a knife that is comparable in performance to $300 custom knives. No joke, guys. And the other thing I want to say is, don't judge Condor tools by this Bushlore knife. I have other Condor products and all of them are excellent. This is the one exception that I don't know why they did this, but they just did not get the grind right on this knife. Everything else about it is perfect. Just the grind, the way it comes from the factory, sucks. If you don't like to tinker, if you want to be able to use your knife right out of the box, then I suggest that you look at a Sapien or at a Mora. Overall, I like this knife and I do recommend it. For $26, you're not going to find a better deal. If you want a smaller knife that goes into a light loadout, like a one-day pack, this is a good knife for that, as long as you like to tinker. Well, that's it for me. Thanks a lot.